We're going to have a look at the assembly and starting process of a Mountfield chainsaw. The first thing we should do when we assemble and use a chainsaw is to familiarise ourselves with the owner's manual. You need to read the manual, understand what it's telling you, understand how to use the chainsaw, and most importantly of all, understand all of the safety features. Chainsaws can be dangerous pieces of equipment if they're not used correctly or if they're in the wrong hands. Let's unpack the components from the box. We have the guide bar, we have a chain, a universal spanner and a screwdriver. The main body of the chainsaw, we have a guide bar cover. Most importantly, we have the owner's manual and certification. Also in the box, we have a file for sharpening the chain. Again, you'll need to read the section on sharpening the chainsaw chain before you attempt to do it. Inside the manual, we have English description, identification of the main components, and everything regarding the safety requirements and assembly of the chainsaw. So you need to read this, read it carefully and understand what it's telling you. On the quick start guide here, telling us to ensure the first thing we do in the assembly process is to ensure that the chain brake is set in the off position. Easy way to check this is to push it forward. It doesn't click, therefore it is actually on. To take the chain brake off, we pull it backwards till it clicks, like that. That is taking the chain brake off. It'll now enable us to take the side cover off the chainsaw quite easily. With the chain brake on, the brake is gripping the clutch cover and it'll make the removal of the side case quite difficult. So, chain brake off. We need to undo these two nuts here. I'm going to use the universal spanner that we have just to slacken those off. We take the nuts completely off the threads because we're going to take this side case right off, and then off comes the side case. When we remove the side case of the chainsaw, you'll notice this yellow piece of plastic here. This is merely a piece of packaging. There's no use for this when we're using the chainsaw. It's only as packaging for transporting, etc. When the machine is assembled, it has no further use, so this can be discarded. We're going to put the bar onto the chainsaw. The bar goes on like this. You'll notice here this little peg, and we see that in the camera. This little peg here, this adjusts the tension of the chain. So that little peg locates in this hole of the chain of the bar. So when we would put that on, that is how it would sit. To get the chain on, we're going to slide it past there. The chain goes this way round with these points, the points of the teeth, facing forward on the top of the bar. Hook it round the back of the clutch and feed it in the groove all the way along the bar. Now, the bar, as we said earlier, needs to locate on that peg. The peg needs adjusting because we can't locate it. This here is the bar and chain adjuster. This adjusts the tension of the chain on the bar. We need to mount the bar on this peg, and sometimes we need to adjust this to be able to get the bar onto the peg. With the screwdriver we adjust that peg so that we can see it is in line with the adjustment hole for the bar. Now that's it. We can see here that the peg is through the adjustment hole on the bar. Once we've lined up the guide bar with the adjuster peg, the next job is to put on the side case of the chainsaw. So we locate the side case of the chainsaw over the two studs and bring it in there. We put on the two securing nuts. Finger tight is enough because the bar needs to be able to slide from behind the casing, so that'll be fine. Now we need to wear gloves or use protective rag whenever we're dealing with the chain, because these teeth here are very, very sharp. And now I can adjust the chain. First of all, I'm going to make sure that it's moving smoothly along the bar, which tells me that it's around the sprocket in here correctly and it's around the sprocket at the end of the bar correctly. We now need to adjust the tension of the chain, and it's very important that we get the tension of the chain correct. As you'll see in the picture here, we've got a significant loop of chain hanging down. To adjust that loop out, with a screwdriver into the adjuster at the front here, and if you can see that, but there we are, we now adjust the chain up. I'll try and keep it so you can see the chain coming up into the guide bar. Okay, there we are. We need to check that we've got the correct tension. Now, with a minimum amount of force, we should be able to pull the three drive teeth clear of the guide bar. Here, it's a little bit slack, so I need to do a little bit more tension. More. Right, I'm happy with that tension there. With two fingers I can still lift the teeth just clear of the bar, but there's a good tension there. You'll also notice that the bar can move up and down. When we tighten the bar, we have to what we call cock the bar, which means we tighten it with the bar in the up position. So I'll move the saw around so we can see that. There are two ways of doing this. Number one, we can lift the bar and make sure it's lifted, that's the down position, make sure it's lifted up, and we tighten the nuts up with the spanner. Tight but not over tight. So that'll be perfect, no problem at all, that'll be perfect. The other way we can cock the bar to tighten the chain is with it on a firm surface, is to rest the weight of the chainsaw on the bar and tighten it up this way. So let's just check that the chain runs around the guide bar correctly. You can see now it's a lot tighter. That's because the chain is brand new, but this will bed in when we use the saw, but there's nothing stopping the chain going round. And as I do this, you can perhaps see that it's already getting a lot easier for the chain to run around the guide bar. We're going to move on now to the fueling of the chainsaw. We have two tanks here. This one here is the chain oil lubrication and cooling tank, so only chain oil goes in there. This tank here is the two-stroke petrol tank, so our petrol and oil mixture goes in here. I'm going to fill the petrol tank first, which is this one here. This is a 2-stroke product. It has to be 2-stroke oil and petrol mixed in the ratio outlined in your manual. We're going to do the cap. Notice I do them one at a time. That way if I spill any fuel, it doesn't go into the oil tank. If I were filling the oil tank, I wouldn't spill any oil into the fuel tank. Always make sure this area here is clear. When you've been using the saw, it's always advisable to brush off around here so that you don't get any sawdust or foreign material into the tank. Using a funnel, I'm going to fill the tank, and you fill the tank, the petrol tank, right up, because the volume of 2-stroke petrol this will use means that if I also fill the chain lubrication tank, this one here, when I've used all the petrol in a full tank, there will be a bit of oil left in the chain oil tank. So it's always best to fill them both up fully at the same time. That way you always know you've got chain oil. Using specific chain oil is always best because it's a very, very stringy oil, has additives in it that make it stick to the chain and not fling off quite as much as ordinary oil would do. So I fill up this tank again all the way to the top so that I know there'll be some oil left in here when I've finished with the petrol. We're going to have a look at the controls of the chainsaw now. If you remember earlier we looked at the chain brake. This is the chain brake here. If I can pull it back like that to the handle, it means that the chain brake is disengaged. Through the starting process of the chainsaw, we always have the chain brake engaged so that the chain cannot accidentally start without us. So to engage the chain brake, we push it firmly forward. And you'll hear that sharp click. That's the chain brake on. This here is the throttle. It has a safety interlock on it, so I can't actually pull the throttle up because this is the safety piece here, and you have to have your hand on this to allow you to pull the trigger up. So at all the time you have to have your hand on the interlock, and then you can use the trigger of the throttle of the chainsaw. Here we have the on and off switch for the saw. O is off and I is on. Pretty well every saw I've ever come across, down is off, up is on. So we'll leave the ignition turned on. Here we have the fuel primer. What this does is pump fuel up to the carburetor. It pumps fuel out of the tank up to the carburetor, and this facilitates easier starting. So we press the fuel bulb like this until we see it's got fuel in it. There we go. So we've got a lot of fuel in the fuel bulb now. That's primed. The next one is the choke lever. The choke lever operates by pulling it out until it clicks. There we go, it's clicked. That's put the chainsaw, the carburetor, onto full choke, and it's also opened the throttle a tiny bit, just above tick over. To cancel the choke, you don't push it in, put your hand on the interlock and pull the trigger. it automatically cancels itself. So in the starting procedure, we turn the saw, we put the chain brake on, we've turned the saw ignition on, we've primed the fuel, we've put it onto choke. We're now ready to go on to starting the chainsaw. At this point in time, I'm going to say the main reason people have difficulty starting a chainsaw is because they over choke the engine. They get too much fuel in the engine. So when we pull the starter rope, the chainsaw will very rarely ever actually start on choke. But what we will hear is the engine fire. Maybe only once or twice, but we'll notice it's fired. As soon as the chainsaw has fired, we turn the choke off. And we don't go back to the choke. We will start the chainsaw off choke. When we've been using the chainsaw for any amount of time, we always start. Yes, we can prime the saw to make sure that we've got fuel in it, but we always start with the choke in. If you've tried to start the saw 5 or 6 times on the rope and have had no life out of it, you could then pull the choke out and pull it once and then release the choke again. If you're having difficulty starting your chainsaw, it will be because you've flooded the engine. And when you've flooded the engine, the only way to get the saw started is to keep pulling the rope with the engine on tick over with no choke. Let's go outside and start the chainsaw.
Roll it.
We're now going to start the chainsaw. This is a brand new chainsaw, hasn't been run yet, so it may take just a few pulls to get it going. Let's just remind ourselves, make sure that we've got fuel in the primer bulb. See this here. Make sure that the saw is turned on. That's on. Make sure that the choke is on. Pull it out till it clicks. There's the choke is on. Make sure that the chain brake is on. That's on. Remove the chain guard and let's get ready to start. Hold the saw in place with the foot through the rear hand guard, and we're going to pull the recoil rope with some force, because we're going to start the saw, and we're going to listen for the saw firing. Remember, it probably won't run on choke, but it will fire. The saw fired then, that was our second pull. The saw has fired, so we disconnect the choke. We push the interlock down and squeeze the trigger. The choke has now gone back in. The saw is on tick over without any choke, and the chain brake is on. We let the engine tick over for 20-30 seconds. Remember, it's a brand new engine and we're just letting it warm up. When we want to use the chainsaw, we must take the chain brake off. That's like that. And then squeeze the throttle.